You know, when we think about uh, massive history-altering migrations at the turn of the 20th century, our minds usually go straight to the Panama Canal.
Right,
Like
absolutely.
we picture the mud, the malaria, thousands of workers literally moving the earth to connect two oceans. It's this, highly visible scar on the landscape.
Yeah, and it completely dominates our historical memory of that era.
Exactly. But while all the cameras and historical accounts were focused on Panama, there was another migration happening just across the water.
One that was just as massive.
Right. Equally massive, equally transformative, and ultimately a history that has largely been hiding in plain sight.
It's so true. I mean, we tend to remember the history that leaves giant concrete monuments behind.
Yeah, big visual stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the migration we are looking at today reshaped entire cultures and economies, even if you can't point to a single massive trench on a map to prove it happened.
So true. So today we are opening up a fascinating set of excerpts from a text called The Sugar Migration and the Rise of Afro-Cuban Enclaves.
It's a really incredible source text.
It really is. And our mission for you, listening right now, is to pull back the curtain on this hidden history. Okay, let's unpack this.
At its core, the material we are examining today gives us a profound story about the staggering human cost of global market swings.
Which is, unfortunately, still very relevant today.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
We are going to look at the incredible, almost defiant resilience of migrant communities.
Right.
And perhaps most crucially, we are going to examine how terrifyingly fast essential workers can be turned into political scapegoats when the economic tide goes out.
Yeah, that pivot is it's jarring. But before we get to the human element, the families, the culture, the eventual fallout, we really have to look at the machine that set this whole thing in motion.
The economic engine.
Exactly, because you don't get hundreds of thousands of people moving across the ocean without a massive economic magnet pulling them.
Right. And that magnet was sugar.
But it wasn't just local agriculture, right? This was an explosion fueled by an influx of U.S. capital right after the Spanish-American War.
Yeah, that post-war period is the absolute catalyst here. After the Spanish-American War, American investment essentially flooded into Cuba.
Like a gold rush.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Specifically targeting the eastern provinces, like Oriente and Camagüey. American investors looked at that land and didn't just see farms.
What did they see?
They saw an industrial opportunity. They transformed the landscape into a massive sugar machine by building what were called centrales.
Wait, let me stop you there, because when you say centrales, my mind just pictures, I don't know, a big windmill or a factory building.
Oh no.
But we were talking about something much bigger.
Much bigger. A central wasn't just a mill where you crush cane. It was a sprawling industrial fiefdom.
A fiefdom, wow.
Literally. It included the massive factory itself, the private rail lines built to transport the cane, the thousands of acres of land surrounding
They
it.
had their own trains.
Oh, yeah. And the company towns where the workers lived. It was an entirely self-contained ecosystem designed for one purpose.
Which was extracting sugar on an unprecedented industrial scale.
Exactly. They completely replaced the traditional, smaller-scale Cuban farming with this relentless, mechanized corporate agriculture.
And then somebody pours gasoline on the fire.
They really do.
Because between 1919 and 1920, there is a massive spike in global raw sugar prices.
Right, due to the war.
Exactly. World War I had essentially decimated the European beet sugar industry, so the global supply plummeted and the demand for Cuban cane sugar skyrocketed.
And this era became known as the Dance of the Millions.
The Dance of the Millions. I mean, what a phrase.
It's incredibly evocative.
It perfectly captures this dizzying, intoxicating period of wealth generation.
It does, but, that dance required a massive amount of physical energy to keep the music playing.
Right. The actual human labor.
Exactly. To keep those giant mills grinding 24 hours a day, the demand for physical labor skyrocketed far beyond what the local Cuban population could or would supply.
Because the work was grueling.
Unbelievably grueling. And the local workforce simply wasn't large enough to match the sudden, explosive scale of the U.S. investments.
So they looked outward.
They had to. Between 1900 and 1930, an estimated 100,000 to 140,000 Jamaicans and Haitians made the short voyage across the Caribbean to eastern Cuba.
To put that in perspective for you listening, that is the population of a small, modern city.
Entirely uprooting itself.
Yeah, entirely uprooting itself and moving across the water. And the reality waiting for them was incredibly incredibly stark.
It really was a tale of two worlds.
Exactly. You have the Dance of the Millions happening in ledger books in New York and Havana, but the actual work generating those millions was brutal.
Just backbreaking.
Right. Picture standing in a field for 12 hours a day under a blistering tropical sun swinging a machete through thick, sharp stalks of cane.
And the air is thick with humidity.
And the smell of burning fields, because they often burned the cane fields before harvesting to clear the underbrush and drive out snakes.
It was dangerous, exhausting work.
What's fascinating here is how global capital literally reshaped both the demographics and the physical landscape of eastern Cuba in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, that is a really crucial point from the text.
You had foreign money dictating the physical environment, carving up the land into these private empires.
And simultaneously driving a massive demographic shift by importing an entirely new labor force to work it.
Right, so the geography of eastern Cuba became a physical manifestation of the global sugar market.
It's a perfect way to put it.
I cannot help but compare this to a modern-day gold rush or like a tech boom town.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Yeah, where you have thousands of people flocking to a remote area because there is sudden, immense money to be made.
But the workers making the journey weren't getting rich.
No, not at all. They were doing this because it offered a vital economic lifeline to their families back home in Jamaica and Haiti.
Right, they were sending remittances back to keep their families afloat.
Exactly. And that brings us to the physical environment they were placed in once they arrived.
Because they weren't, moving into Cuban cities or integrating into local neighborhoods.
No, they were confined to those isolated company towns we mentioned.
Specifically living in what were called barracones.
Let's visualize these barracones, because the text goes into this. We are talking about long, incredibly basic wooden or corrugated metal barracks.
Stiflingly hot.
Stiflingly hot, cramped, with workers sleeping hammock to hammock.
And no privacy whatsoever.
None. But I have a question about this setup. If the Cuban sugar industry needed this labor so desperately to keep the mills running, why isolate them in barracks?
It's a very logical question.
Right. Why not integrate them into the local workforce in towns? Wouldn't a settled, integrated workforce be more stable?
Well, that assumes the goal was building a community.
Oh.
But the goal was purely extraction. From the perspective of the central owners, integration was actually a threat.
How so?
They wanted a workforce that was entirely dependent on the company. If you live in a company-owned barracone and you shop at the company's store...
You're trapped.
Exactly. And you are isolated from the local Cuban population, so you have very little leverage to strike or demand better wages.
That makes a dark kind of sense.
Plus, the language barrier Jamaicans speaking English, Haitians speaking Creole, locals speaking Spanish was intentionally maintained.
Keep them divided.
Right. A divided workforce is much easier to manage.
But the standard immigrant narrative we usually hear is all about assimilation.
Yes, the melting pot idea.
Right. You move to a new place, you blend in, you adopt the language and the customs over time.
But that didn't happen here. Surrounded by a Spanish-speaking Catholic majority and confined by the company town structure, the Jamaican migrants did something remarkable.
They really did.
They didn't assimilate. Instead, they built highly durable, self-sustaining enclaves.
They carved out spaces of profound cultural familiarity in a strictly controlled environment.
Exactly.
They created mutual aid societies to support each other.
Which was vital for survival.
Right. They established English-speaking schools for their children. And there is a detail in our material that just blows my mind.
The cricket matches.
Yes. They held highly formalized cricket matches.
It's such an incredible visual.
Imagine the surreal visual of this, right? You are in the shadow of a massive, smoke-belching industrial sugar mill.
It's muddy, it's grueling.
The air smells like molasses and sweat. And right in the middle of this, you have workers dressed in pristine whites, playing a leisurely, formalized British sport like cricket.
I know, it sounds absurd on the surface.
Really out of place.
But it was deeply strategic. Playing cricket, wearing those whites, it was a way of enforcing order, respectability, and a shared cultural identity.
Wow.
Yeah, in a place that wanted to reduce them to nothing but physical energy.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. They didn't just recreate the comforts of home.
No, they went much further.
They became a powerhouse of transnational political thought.
Which is astounding given the conditions.
The material highlights that they established deeply active chapters of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, or the UNIA, Now, for those who might not be familiar, Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican political leader who built a massive global movement in the 1920s, focused on Black pride, economic independence, and Pan-African solidarity.
His philosophy, Garveyism, was incredibly influential across the whole region.
Huge! But I have to push back on the logistics of this based on the text.
Go for it.
I am trying to imagine the day-to-day reality. You just described guys cutting cane for 12 hours under a burning sun, living in crowded barracks.
Right.
How does a population engaged in such exhausting, back-breaking labor manage to find the energy, the time, and the sheer organizational willpower to become a hub of international political thought?
It's a great question.
Like, how did they actually do it?
Well, it wasn't effortless, that's for sure. It was a deliberate, exhausting choice.
Yeah.
They managed it through intense communal discipline and pooling their extremely limited resources. You asked how they did it practically?
Right, the logistics.
If a worker couldn't read, someone else in the barracone would read Garvey's newspaper, The Negro World, aloud by lantern light after a 14-hour shift.
Oh, wow. So they made it a community event.
Exactly. They pooled pennies from their meager wages to rent spaces for UNIA meetings or to fund the English schools. They rotated responsibilities.
So it was essentially a massive, highly organized collective effort.
It had to be.
They were funding their own dignity.
Precisely that.
Yeah.
You have to remember that the centrales were engineered to treat workers as mere cogs.
Right, replaceable parts.
Exactly. Their labor had a price, but their humanity was irrelevant to the bottom line. So building these enclaves, organizing UNIA chapters, holding those cricket matches,
It was rebellion.
it was psychological necessity. By establishing these networks of solidarity, they effectively turned their physical displacement into what the text brilliantly describes as networked social power.
Let's break down network social power so it's super clear for the listener. Because it sounds a bit like, an academic term, but it's actually a very practical concept.
Very practical.
It's like they built an early analog version of a massive group chat or a mutual support network that stretched across the entire Caribbean.
Way before the internet existed.
Exactly. If someone got sick, the network stepped in. If someone needed to send money home, the network facilitated it.
Right. They were saying, we are not just isolated laborers waiting to be used up. We are a connected, powerful culture.
That is exactly the dynamic. They asserted their political agency and identity in an environment that actively tried to erase both.
But, and this is a big but, fellow bud, there is a deep vulnerability built into this setup.
Because of the economics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because all of this networked social power, all these schools and UNIA chapters were entirely tethered to the success of a single volatile global commodity.
Sugar.
Sugar.
Which brings us to 1929. We go from the absolute height of the Dance of the Millions, where money is flowing and these Garveyite enclaves are thriving, directly into a brick wall.
A total collapse.
The stock market crashes, and the ripple effect hits eastern Cuba like an earthquake.
The fatal flaw of the Cuban sugar economy was that it had no internal safety net.
Not at all.
It relied entirely on the whims of the global market. When Wall Street crashed in 1929, global consumption of luxury goods, including sugar, plummeted.
And so the bottom completely fell out of the Cuban sugar industry.
Almost overnight. The mills slowed down or stopped entirely. Sugar literally sat rotting in the fields because it wasn't worth the cost of harvesting it.
And the human fallout was immediate.
Devastating.
This massive West Indian population went from being this essential, highly sought-after labor force to becoming a targeted political scapegoat almost overnight.
It's a terrifying shift.
It makes me think of a massive factory machine suddenly breaking down because of a power grid failure miles away.
Okay, yeah.
And instead of fixing the grid, the factory owners decide to blame the specific gears they just paid top dollar to import.
That's a great analogy.
Like, the gears didn't break the machine, the power went out, but the gears are highly visible, they look different from the rest of the machine, and they are incredibly easy to blame.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see a historical pattern that repeats itself time and time again.
Unfortunately, yes.
Whenever there is a massive global depression, economic anxiety swiftly mutates into nationalist fervor.
Every time.
The Jamaican and Haitian workers were no longer viewed as the engine of the economy.
Yeah.
Suddenly, to a local population that was starving and out of work, these migrants were viewed as outsiders taking scarce jobs and resources from native Cubans.
The economic fear needed a physical target.
Exactly. And this highly visible, culturally distinct, non-assimilated migrant community became that target.
The public sentiment turned hostile quickly, but the core of this deep dive is what happened next.
The legislative response.
Right, because that racialized panic didn't just remain as, angry articles in newspapers or public grumbling. It was codified into law.
Which changes everything.
In 1933, the Cuban government passed what became known as the 50% Law, formally the nationalization of labor law.
The mechanics of this law were incredibly blunt.
Very simple, very destructive.
It mandated that at least half of all employees at any business or estate had to be native-born Cubans.
Right. And on paper, if you are a government official trying to manage a catastrophic depression, you might frame this as a protective economic measure for your citizens.
You might try to sell it that way, sure.
But on the ground, the enforcement was a completely different story. It was swiftly weaponized.
Weaponized to justify mass deportation.
It's just horrific. We are talking about armed rural guards coming into the company towns, checking papers, and raiding the barracones.
Yes.
The 50% law led to the forced repatriation and mass deportation of tens of thousands of Afro-Caribbean workers.
Thousands of people were essentially herded onto ships and sent back across the water.
And we have to consider the destination here.
Right, what were they going back to?
They were being deported back to Jamaica and Haiti in 1933.
Height of the Depression.
The Great Depression was global. Jamaica was drowning economically. There were no jobs waiting for them. The state had no capacity to absorb tens of thousands of returning workers.
And the immediate reality for those families is really the focal point in the tragedy here.
The human cost.
You had individuals who had lived in Cuba for 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
They had built those schools. They had established those UNIA halls.
They had built a life.
They had married. They had children who were born in Cuba. Suddenly, a father might be forced onto a ship back to Kingston, while his Cuban-born children and wife remained behind.
Oh, man.
A single legislative mandate fractured these deep community networks and thousands of families.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and look at the trajectory, you have this vibrant, highly organized, culturally rich community.
Right.
A community that had figured out how to survive and thrive in one of the harshest industrial environments imaginable.
They did everything right, essentially.
And they aren't undone by a natural disaster. They are undone by a shift in global markets, followed by a stroke of a pen in a capital city hundreds of miles away.
This raises an important question about the nature of assimilation and what happens to a culture when visibility becomes dangerous.
Because not everyone was deported, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Some Afro-Caribbean workers did manage to stay in eastern Cuba, but what happened to them?
They had to hide.
They were forced into deep, rapid assimilation for their own safety.
Right, because standing out was no longer just an act of defiance. It was a massive liability.
Exactly.
The very things that gave them that networked social power a decade prior, speaking English loudly, holding UNIA meetings, the public cricket matches.
Those were now targets on their backs.
Wow.
Exactly the case. To survive the nationalist regime, they had to bury their culture. The UNIA flags were put away.
The English schools were shuttered.
They stopped speaking English in public. The vibrant community was driven completely underground.
It's heartbreaking.
The material notes that they left a permanent but quiet Anglo-Caribbean imprint on the eastern provinces that endures today.
A quiet imprint.
It is a legacy of survival through invisibility. You can still find traces of it in the food, in family names, in whispered family histories.
But the loud, proud public culture was intentionally silenced.
Yes.
Let's review the massive journey we just went on.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. We started with the sheer scale of the Dance of the Millions, a time when an influx of foreign capital demanded hundreds of thousands of workers to cross the ocean and fuel a brutal sugar machine.
Right.
We saw how those workers refused to just be cogs, instead building incredible Garveyite enclaves, pooling their pennies, educating each other, and claiming their dignity in the dirt of the company towns.
Such resilience.
And then we witnessed the sudden whiplash of the 1929 market crash, the weaponization of the 1933 50% law, the forced deportations, and the families fractured by economic panic. Yeah. For you listening right now, it is so crucial to think about how this isn't just a dusty history lesson.
Not at all.
We rely heavily on massive global supply chains today. We rely on economies that demand the constant vulnerable movement of human lives across borders to do the heavy lifting.
Whether that's in agriculture, manufacturing, or logistics.
Exactly. This history challenges us to look at the invisible labor around us right now and to ask ourselves how quickly Those essential workers could be turned into scapegoats if the market suddenly shifted tomorrow.
I think that is a vital lens to look through, and I will leave you with this final thought.
Go for it.
We started this deep dive talking about the Panama Canal,
Uh-huh.
a massive, highly visible physical monument to historical labor.
Right, the giant scar in the earth.
But the Cuban sugar migration left a different kind of monument. If an entire vibrant culture, complete with schools, international political networks, and deep community ties, can be intentionally fractured and forced into silence almost overnight by an economic shift and a single law,
Yeah.
how many other quiet cultural imprints are hiding in the landscapes we walk through every day, just waiting to have their histories uncovered?